Good evening. Welcome to episode 7 of Learn Live UAE. Really excited for tonight's show. The focus of it is supporting school-wide learning and teaching. We've got two amazing guests on the show this evening. We've got Saran, who's Deputy Head Teaching and Learning at Dubai College, as well as Robin Macpherson, who's Assistant Rector and soon to be Rector in a school in Scotland. So we've got fantastic set of presenters here, and I'm really keen to hear their thoughts, Mark, this evening on supporting school-wide teaching and learning, because it's a really difficult path to traverse, because in school, everyone's at different phases and stages of their career and need different support in different manners. So I think this is going to be a fantastic show to get a really good insight from two amazing educators who not only are hugely invested in their own and their school's professional development, but also wider community, both having hosted research ed events. And Robin's just set up a PL Gathering event as well for educators in his local community. So really excited to hear what they've got to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And hello to everybody, welcome. And thank you for joining us this evening for our conversation on Learn Live UAE. As always, there's a chat window on the side, and I always get the direction wrong. So it's either on that side or that side, but one of those two directions, you'll find a little chat window. Please feel free to send through your comments, your questions. And one of the beauties of the platform is that we can be really agile and sort of respond to the questions you might have. When you work with schools and work in schools, there's always great pockets of excellence in regards to teaching and learning, but getting all of these things working at scale is always a really difficult thing to do. And so it's fantastic. We've got some people joining us this evening who have been sort of not just talking the talk, because we've got fantastic things being shared by Dee, for example, recently out of Dubai College with the teaching and learning digitally sort of guide that she compiled with colleagues. We've also got Robin Macpherson, who's a published author, who's written a fantastic book before, and I'm sure he's got more in the pipeline too, and I'm hoping he'll be able to share more about his various projects during the show too. So we're really looking forward to welcoming them, and welcome to you here on the show this evening too. Thank you very much for joining us. How has your week been, Ollie? You're getting ready for your holiday soon, aren't you?
It's been really good, yeah. It's well, with 2.5 weeks away from summer holidays, I think everyone in the Middle East is ready for a break. We've actually got a staff wellbeing day on Thursday, and it's been instigated by our swag group at BISAD. So that's our staff wellbeing and action group. So really looking forward to that, to get a bit less screen time for a day. And the students also, I think, will really benefit from that. Once we're now 13-14 weeks deep into online learning. So looking forward to finishing the week on a high, ready for the final 2 weeks before the summer. How's your week been?
Yeah, really good. I'm making the final sort of touches with Al Kingsley on that guide to creating a digital strategy. One of the things we were talking about in the sort of pre-show conversation in the little virtual lobby we've got here on our show about the opportunities that lockdown has actually brought to us. And so these were some of the things that Robin was actually asking in the PL Gathering conversation on the weekend. I think there's been some fantastic opportunities that have been afforded to us. It's been a terrible time, not just for us who are in our sort of isolated countries, but globally with coronavirus. But it has brought out some fantastic opportunities, I think. And so really looking forward to getting that guide out and sharing some of the things that we've learned and some more contextual things that schools can use as a basis around that, alongside a whole host of other things, such as the work with the Global Ethics Academy, with Microsoft and Q and all those different things. So really busy and keeping myself well afloat and very busy, like I say. Listen, Ollie, do you think we should bring our first guest in? Because we could talk all night, you and I, but people haven't come to hear from us, have they? So let's bring in our first guest, shall we? And I'll do that. Welcome to Dee Saran. Hiya, Dee.
Hi, evening, guys. How are you?
Great.
Yeah, we're really good, as you probably just heard. We don't want to go through all of that. How are things with you at Dubai College?
Yeah, no, not bad. I'm not going to lie. We're pretty knackered. We're all zoomed out, and I think we're definitely, like Ollie, heading towards the end of term with seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. But we're good, busy, but good. Trying to stay positive. Trying to manage everything with home life, with work life, with the kids. But no, everyone at DC is working really hard, and I think we're giving it out all for the next 14 days, literally on countdown.
So I was really fortunate to work with you back a little while ago at the school, and one thing I was really impressed with the staff were the professional learning conversations that I had. We mentioned one person just before the show, but everyone just seemed really up for having a conversation about how to develop and improve. It goes back to that Dylan Williams thing where and I forget the quote, even though Ollie and I had a conversation about this very quote just earlier today. Dylan William talks about how every teacher, can get better, can improve, and should take on the responsibility to do that and look at improvement. And that was something that really resonated with all of the colleagues that I spoke with at the school. It was a real privilege to work with you all. So I want to sort of dig into some of the questions I've got about that guide, for example, and also about how you lead on teaching and learning at the college. But before I dig into the questions, did you want to sort of run through the short presentation that you've got? Because I don't want to ask questions that you may well then answer within your presentation. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, not a problem. I'm just going to share my screen. So let me know if you can see it. Hold on. There we go.
Brilliant stuff. We can see that, and that's just coming up for us right now.
Okay, shall I get started?
Yes, please do. Yeah, we can see it all, and we can see you too.
Lovely. Okay, so evening, everybody. I'm not sure where you are, but it's really, really lovely to speak to all of you. So just to give you a bit of context about the school. So I teach at Dubai College, which is an academically selective school. It's pretty well established. It's around about 42 years old, I think, this year. And my role there is really, I'm one of the deputy heads, and I oversee teaching and learning, professional development, and more recently, digital learning. So I just want to take you through sort of the journey that we've been on. For the last 4 years, I've been there for 4 years, and I was lucky because my role was relatively new. So I had quite a lot of autonomy and I guess creative license to basically make it my own, and just to share with you some of the key nuggets and takeaways that I think are really useful when you're sort of in the position of leading learning across school. So I think just to start with, I think it's so important that you have a really clear vision. I think one of the things that particularly, in schools that we get washed away with is so many things coming from outside, so many things changing. It's really clear, it's really important that you have a clear vision, and even more importantly, a clear set of values and beliefs about learning. I think it really helps to have a shared philosophy. And when I first arrived sort of 4 years ago, Mike and I, Mike's the head at our school, talked about this idea of a shared language of learning, so that everybody's moving in the same direction, talking about learning in the same way. So I think whether you're starting afresh or whether you're taking on a role in a new school, it's ask yourself that question: what does teaching and learning look like in your school, in your specific context? Because until you define that, you genuinely won't be able to drive things in a really purposeful way. And I think sometimes we're really torn between those things that are external drivers. And I know one of the things that sort of pushed me out of the UK was this, constant focus on driving towards sort of inspection outcomes. And obviously they're important, but if that's the only thing that you're driving at your school, you're not really looking at the internal needs. And I love this quote from Dimmock, Clive Dimmock, who sort of alludes to the fact that so many leaders are now held accountable to sort of external drivers, that it's so important for us as leaders of learning to look at what are the internal needs within our school. And the way that we've done that at DC is really taking like an evidence-informed approach to leadership. And we draw on research, we're research literate, we're research informed, and we draw on research on various things. When I first got there, we looked at HPL, which is, quite a well-regarded program in relating to sort of, gifted students. And we used that research from Professor Deborah Eyre as a means to create, you can see at the bottom there, the DC learner profile. And that really was in consultation with parents, with staff, with students. And we created like this shared vocabulary of learning, which sort of has seeped into everything that we do, whether it be lesson observations, whether it be, going in and talking about coaching and leading learning. We've also used evidence-informed leadership in terms of using it for action research, some of the literature that we read, both on the pastoral side, but also on the teaching and learning side. I think it's also really important. Some people get afraid of this, but this idea of having sort of robust and rigorous self-evaluation data. Robust doesn't necessarily have to be scary. I think it's really important that you have data that informs teaching and learning. And this may come from lesson observations, it might come from student surveys, it might come from parental surveys. But this idea that Murphy says it helps you to stay focused consistently on the right stuff, which essentially is learning, teaching and assessment. And what we do at DC is we collate all of this data and we sort of use it in a diagnostic way to really help us focus on the pedagogies that we need to develop. So we know from that rich data set that some of the things that we need to work on and have worked on since are digital learning, metacognition or the science of learning, stretch and challenge because we're an academically selective school, and then heartness and oracy because we're really keen to have really articulate students who can communicate, reason and argue. So for us, that data has been quite instrumental alongside the research to help us to focus our staff on 4 different areas, which I think is really, really important. We've also moved away from lesson grading, and I know this is like not new, and so many schools don't grade lessons, but I think it's really important to have a safe culture. And Mike and I have worked quite hard on basically merging our internal vision of teaching and learning with the external sort of inspection framework so that everything is sort of merged together. So this idea of moving from grading to shading has been really empowering for heads of department. And we've really driven coaching to do that. And we've linked it to our sort of professional review. So every teacher will have one objective which is specifically linked to teaching and learning and specifically focusing on one of the 4 pedagogies, which really encourages, I think, this sense of mastery and sort of working on one thing and doing it really, really well. I think in the UAE, as you'll know, as Ollie will know, and I think as, those of you that have worked here will know, technology and innovation is a real driver, and part of the UAE 2021 vision is obviously all to do with technology. But I guess for us, innovation is more relating to building a research culture, which helps us come up with new ideas that are contextual, which work within our environment for our students and our staff. So one of the tips I would give you is don't necessarily think innovation is technology. Define innovation for your school first, and link it to the pedagogies that you want to focus on, because I think that's really, really important. One of the other things that has been instrumental in sort of driving these 4 areas is the creation of this role called Specialist Leaders of Education. So we created it, I think, about 3 years ago, and it's a role which basically has a time remission. I think it's 3 periods, and it allows those staff to basically become coaches in one of the 4 pedagogies. And you can see those that are in blue are sort of SLEs we've had in the past, and the ones in green are current SLEs. You can see them, and to be honest, without them, I wouldn't be able to do the job that I do, because they are completely committed to owning, to loving the area that they're working in, to researching, to reading about everything related to whether it be science of learning, Harkness, oracy. And what they do is they are sort of a non-judgmental coach for staff that can be utilised. So they're really, really purposeful. And we together create this innovation action team, which sort of drives these areas. And we've got some sort of affiliated members as well, looking at study skills, looking at academic enrichment. But what you'll notice is that common thread of those 4 pedagogies has stuck with us for the last four years. So it's given staff continuity, which is really important. And we have an amazing staff teaching and learning team that are really active in sharing ideas. And this year we've recruited some student learning leaders, which I'm really excited about. We've also drawn on, and I think this is really important, research which is contextual, and it relates to our context. And I think that's really important because there's so much research out there that it's really important that you sort of narrow it down to what works with you. And I think some of the research that's been most influential is Michael Fullen's new pedagogies, but also Rose Luckin's work on digital education. And we've had staff, it's amazing. In the first year, I think 3 years ago, 25 staff were engaged in action research projects. And that research, coupled with the SLE research, has been really pivotal in designing, for example, our digital learning profile and strategy. So the research that Jerry did, our SLE in digital skills, and the research that I did, as well as drawing on Rose Luckin's work, helped us to create this infographic, and Mark has helped us with that as well, to really frame our thinking about what does digital pedagogy look like at DC, and how does that relate to Harkness? How does that relate to Stretch and Challenge? So completely weaving it through. And really that's been quite influential in informing the way that we've adapted to online learning, because we've kept Oracy, we've kept Harkness on the agenda, we've kept collaboration, communication, and shared lots of training, some snippets of what's worked well with staff constantly throughout this whole period. We've also really luckily funded staff to do master's projects. So we part fund master's projects, and this is an example. Sarah Lambert has done some research on Harkness and Oracy, and it's been really instrumental in driving Oracy across the school. And I would say one tip that I would give you is, that's great. And if you've got time to do a master's, that's fine. But teachers are so busy. And I think it's really important to draw on experts. And one of the things that we've been working on, really, really hard is creating partnerships with universities. So we worked with Oxford University. I think it was last year. And the SLEs had like a coach, Professor Catherine Byrne. This year, I'm really excited that we're going to be partnering with Cambridge University, looking at Oracy, metacognition, those sorts of things. So rather than flying in the expert, we're working with them in tandem as sort of like a critical friend. So they're constantly helping us review and refine. So get some help. And also, I think time is the perennial problem for so many people. You've got to make time for this. We've woven in time, not only in our inset days, but in our Sunday PD days, we've woven in time where staff have the autonomy to basically choose which of these that they want to focus on for the year. And we create time for these lesson study groups to meet together. We also offer cover for staff because they've been working really hard on collaborating, co-planning lessons. And we've been using this to sort of encourage teacher efficacy. And we've got a really supportive SLT, and we will give staff cover to go and see and watch each other in their lessons, which has been quite good. Other things that we've done to sort of encourage teacher efficacy, I think every school is doing these. Robin will be familiar with Pedagogy. I think they came out of Scotland. We run these at lunchtime. The lure of having some lunch and learning some nuggets is really, really nice. And you can see some of the photos there. We also have Spark events, which are sort of short snippets of best practice in areas around those sort of 4 pedagogies. And more recently, Teams, Microsoft Teams, has really revolutionized our PD. We've had staff making snippets on MS Streams, screencasting examples, sharing lessons. And really, this has helped sort of the continuous training and support that we've given. But it's all really been teacher-led, and it's been bottom-up, and there's a lot of autonomy in all of this. And, you know, I think one of the things that we've really tried to really push is this idea of research schools being reflective, constantly learning, not stopping, always sharing best practice. And like I said, sort of partnering with people that can help us and support us, because we're not necessarily, you know, we're not necessarily the experts, but we can definitely, I think, draw on people that can support us. So I hope that's like a whistle-stop tour of 4 years, really condensed, and sort of gives you the overview of what we've been working on. But sort of headlines is small scale, be really specific, model best practice, and give people time and support, I think is the basic takeaways.
It's great to hear that. We've just had a comment that really resonates with a lot of what you've said there, Dee, from Jane, who's head of MFL at Down House. You know, shared philosophy and all of this is so important, and really aligns with my own thinking as well, that it needs to be a bottom-up rather than a top-down approach within schools, so that you do ensure that, you know, everyone's in the boat and rowing in the same direction, so that you do see the results that you want to see, both on a kind of micro and macro scale. I've got a question for you that's more sort of leadership based. Obviously, as a deputy head, you've got to balance the demands not only of teaching load, but also you know, supporting Mike, the head, as well as school owners, supporting teachers, your own students as well. How do you go about making sure you maintain positive relationships with all of those stakeholders?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think time is really important, to give people your time. And I think, you know, during the day, often, you'll know, as SLT, all of your time goes to people. And I think that's really, really important for you to make time to listen to people, to empathize with them, to work through things. Because I think, you know, the old style leadership of autocratic, you know, we're going to do this, you're going to do this, it just doesn't work anymore. And I think discussions are really important. But I think I'm just really lucky that we've all got a shared value and moral compass in the way that we see education. And I think one bit of advice that gives somebody maybe who's thinking about taking on an SLT role is do your research. I did, you know. I wanted to work somewhere where I would get support, but also have autonomy. And I think I've definitely got that. And I think the whole not-for-profit ethos is quite democratic. It's quite open. It's not non-hierarchical. So I think it was everything I was looking for. And I think we as a team sort of embody that. And, you know, I feel really lucky and privileged. But, you know, I think it's sometimes hard. You know, what is your value system as an educator? I think that's important. But time, give people time, because they really value it.
Just try and get rid of that echo there for a second. It was interesting to talk about the pedagogy thing. Just a personal note aside, I found, you know, on Facebook they have this like this day in history sort of thing from your timeline. It was 6 years ago today that I organised the first pedagogy with some other people in Bristol at the Bristol Grammar School. So I was sharing that earlier today on Twitter. It's been going around for a long time as the pedagogy event. I wanted to sort of drill down a little bit, Dee, because it's really difficult when you go into a role such as yours. clearly, the sort of key bits of advice there about time and spending time with people, being present, all those sort of things. I definitely saw that in the school when I visited. Open door, people just coming into your office all the time, all this sort of thing, and you being ever present and things around the school site, and the great relations you had with your colleagues. But it's really difficult when you sort of move into a role such as yours to actually do that, because if you think, if you could see where you wanted to get to 4 years ago when you first started doing this, I'm sure you probably thought you wouldn't have even got as far as you have. But it's really difficult to actually map all those things out. How do you how do you manage that in your own head and your planning? Because often you're really skilled, you know what you want to achieve. How do you make it so that you are confident enough to move through those things and know that you'll be doing the right thing when you're sort of there by yourself and not knowing where things are going in front of you? And adding on to that as well, part of what you'll be doing with all this is sort of giving a bit of quality assurance to your teaching and learning policy in a school. So how do you go about identifying the strengths and weaknesses in a teaching and learning policy alongside that?
Okay, I'll start with the first question because there's quite a lot there. I guess it is slightly tougher when you come in fresh and new. You haven't necessarily worked your way up. People don't know you. There's an element of you've got to earn your trust, and I think you've got to prove yourself, and you've got to take time. And that's why I think spending time with people is so important, because they've got to really get to know you and understand what you're about. And equally, you've got to spend time understanding the culture and the ethos of the school. I think anybody going into a role like this, just don't make any radical changes. Just watch, look, listen, and then get a feel of it. And I think, I think staff, they're so hardworking at DC, and we all want the best for the students. And I think whilst there's been change, I think it's been scaled back. We've slimmed it down as we've gone, and it's not always been right. And I think that's one of the things you've got to emulate as a leader. You're learning on the job. You will get things wrong and you will adapt, but that's okay as long as you come out of it in the right way with the right decisions for staff. So we're constantly getting feedback. We're sending surveys, we talk to staff, we have hogs like heads of faculty that feed into us. So I think that constant feedback and a really supportive SLT team who kind of are open and honest and will challenge and debate and really we question each other, which I think is really healthy when you're in a team rather than just all saying yes all the time. I think that's a good thing. In regards to the teaching and learning policy, it took me a long time to write ours because I didn't want to write something that wasn't actually real or happening or in place. And I actually wrote it last year, and I felt genuinely like I could put my hand on my heart and say, these things are happening. This is what we're about. We've got the evidence, we've got the data, we've got the research. And in terms of strengths and weaknesses, we're really lucky that we've got governors who are with educational backgrounds. Obviously, Mike is really, really instrumental in supporting me, but also we've got a great governor called Keith Budge, who used to be a head. So I always send him policies and things to look at, and he's really happy to give us feedback. And I think governors do a lot behind the scenes. And I think if you've got supportive governance, you've got a supportive head, it definitely helps, and they'll give you sort of feedback to tweak that sort of policy. But a policy is a policy. It's not really any good unless it's real, it's happening and it's actionable.
Some great pearls of wisdom there. What I really like and admire about what you're doing is the nature by which you're going about things. You're not only inward facing, but you're also outward facing. Do you have any advice for other leaders, other schools, as to how to go about trying to build those relationships with educators, researchers, people that work in universities?
Yeah, I think the main thing is focus on what's going on in your school first. It's quite tempting to sort of reach out and be all things to all people. But I think just by focusing on what you're doing within your own school, you'll naturally then find things that support the pedagogies and the ethos and the vision that you do. And I think, look around you. Like, we collaborate. We've got the not-for-profit group, BSID, which Mike heads up with Andy from Desk. There are there's lots of great networks locally. But then also, I think things like Research Ed, those sorts of things are really, really great because, again, they're bottom up. They're drawing on research, but not necessarily letting research dictate what you do in school. So I think that bridge between research and practice is really important. But be selective in who you partner with, and don't fly in the expert. Your expertise is within your house. So draw on the best practice that's going on. Mobilize the troops, our teaching and learning group and the SLEs, they're so instrumental in sharing best practice. And during this whole period, they've really driven and shared great nuggets. And I think that would be sort of the advice I would give. But universities locally, University of Birmingham is really, really proactive within the UAE about making links with schools. So reach out to your local universities as well. And I'm sure there's lots of others that I haven't mentioned.
That's great advice. Sort of building, not only supporting, but building that capacity from within makes it so much more authentic as well. When you can pop into a classroom around the corner and see that actually working in practice, that's such an impactful and powerful way of sort of sharing your professional learning and your practice in the school as well. I'm really keen to hear Robin's perspective on this. He's been patiently waiting in the lobby and he's smiling now. I can see him just as he's about to come in. Should we bring Robin in so he can sort of join us and add his thoughts? Hi, Robin. Welcome. Hi.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. Good to talk to you.
How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. I think like everyone else, it'll be quite nice when this term turns into a holiday. That would be good. And the screen fatigue and all the rest of it, but still smiling, still going.
Good stuff. Thank you so much for joining us this evening on the show. You've been listening to Dee's presentation. I'm just wondering if you had any questions for Dee at all about it, or any sort of comments you could add to reinforce the point she was making.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've got sore neck now from nodding a lot, so much of what Dee was saying there. And like you, I've been to Dubai College, and I used to work in the UAE, so I knew a lot about the school. But that is going back a while. I mean, I was in the UAE from 2008 to 2011, and it was a very different scene then. So when I went to speak last year at Research Ed in Copus at Dubai College, really impressed. It was great. I met Dee properly and Mike Lambert and Sarah Lambert, the team there. Really good time, and just really impressed with what was going on at the school. And I just thought, I wish this kind of thing had been available when I was in the UAE. And I think the interconnectedness of what's going on now is a thing we could talk about tonight, because I think it's one of the most positive developments in global education is the way that we can partner up. We have so much more capability to do that as schools. And absolutely, talking about partnering with universities, that's something that actually should have been happening a lot more throughout education history. I think it does happen, but it can happen more. But even just things like working with the Teacher Development Trust, that's great. I worked with them before, and David Weston's work is so good. And I wouldn't have been able to do that when I worked in the UAE. Well, for one, that organization didn't exist, but even if it did, I don't quite know how that would have worked. So it's a very different setup now. And I suppose my question for Dee is just about how long Dubai College has been on this journey, because I know it takes a long time to get to the type of level that you're at, all the initiatives you put in place, the structures you put in place, and making a philosophy, a strategy, and then actually turning it into practical action. So how far back do you think this goes in your school?
I think it was definitely on the agenda before I got there, and I think there was work already being done. There was a teaching and learning group. I think like I mentioned 4 years ago, my role was a new appointment, so I think there was an appetite for focusing on it within the college. So I think probably over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, it's not something that happens overnight, and it's not necessarily one person. It's a whole host of people that have sort of I was talking about mobilizing the troops. There's a whole host of people behind the scenes that I've shared with you that have been instrumental in driving that. So I would say probably about 5 or 6 years, but probably more focused in the last 4 years.
Where did that impetus come from? Was it somebody sat down and said, you know what, this is what we should be doing? Or was there a general mandate for that, do you think?
I think it was Mike, Mike wanting to, focus on teaching and learning. I think there was some data behind it. There was some evidence that suggested that we probably need to create a shared language of learning and define what it is that makes the place magic, and sort of, just encourage a little bit more reflection and communication, and just talking about learning in the staff room, talking about what's going on, on a day-to-day basis, reading, sharing, all of those sorts of things. Just creating a culture of learning, I think, was something that he had in mind, and I think that's honestly where it came from.
I mean, you work at a school that has, for decades really been seen as the top school or one of the top schools in the UAE. So I was just wondering, was there any sort of resistance from the teaching staff who were saying, well, do you know what, we get great results, why do we need to do all of this on top? Can't we just stay the same?
I think, to be honest, you get that anywhere. Teaching is a very, very busy profession. And even when I was working at the teaching school back in the UK, and I was working with all of the different schools, it's like, I haven't got time to do this extra thing because I need to do what I need to do. I think with any change, naturally there is a little bit of caution around it, but it's that whole idea about trust and people understanding why, and you giving them the evidence and sharing with them, and I guess taking them and bringing them on the journey with you, as opposed to that sort of autocratic thing of we're all doing this now. And that takes longer, and you have to be more patient. But I think in the end, it creates something which is much more authentic, rather than sort of like a tick box.
I think that's absolutely right. It is the long game, isn't it? I remember talking to people from school in America and in Washington, D.C., St. Andrews, where they basically been at this for about 10 years and have a whole school policy about neuroscience and actually embedding that in teaching and learning, where pupils come in and that's the first thing they do is do that course before they can go into the classroom, and the same with their teachers. And after a decade of doing that, they still feel that they're working towards kind of making this a reality. So it's not something that you can kind of launch and expect to see results in a couple of years. It's very much the long haul.
And I think that time element is really important, because if you give the time, they see it as something. Most teachers want to do things. I think when you give them the time like we have, the feedback on lesson study has been really positive, because there's been time dedicated towards that. I think to keep adding on to their plates without that time, it makes it just trickier. So yeah, I don't think that. I don't know. That might be my child. I'm not sure.
I was going to say that all sort of links up quite nicely into the efficacy of CPD and the issues that I see. I get booked to go in and do an inset day with schools a lot, and there is no one size fits all. And, having worked with me before, it's all about, for me, the impact, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's being able to have those conversations over a longer period of time. And it's great to see that you're working and sort of embedding that within what you're trying to achieve at the college as well. I wondered, Robin, just jumping back to you for a second now, how things are going with you. So you've been a dollar for a little while now. You better take up your first rectorship. You rather than jumping straight into these questions and things beforehand like we did with Dee, is there anything that you want to sort of share with us before we do that? We can refer back to what you're going to share to us and then ask you questions then. Would that work better for you?
I don't really mind. I'm happy with either. I've actually not been at dollar that long, as some people have reminded me in moving on. This is just the end of my third year. So my first year was very much about learning and thinking about what was the culture of the school and where were we at that moment in time. So I'd learned a huge amount in the 6 years I was at Wellington College before that, and I worked for Brandt & Selden, and I worked in the Festival of Education there, and lots of other really great initiatives. So I had a huge amount of energy and things that I wanted to launch. And I was also thinking of what state Scottish education was in as well. And so what could I contribute on a wider stage than just in dollar? So the first year was really about learning the school. And I think the fastest thing I did was I basically saw every teacher teach before I kind of opened my mouth and said anything. So it took just over a term, but we've got around about 130 teachers. So I was able to see all of them teach and then synthesize all of that to say that, as somebody with fresh eyes, this is what I think is going on in the culture of teaching and learning in the school. And that started some interesting discussions. So year 2 was really when we started restructuring things around professional learning and about what we were really trying to do in the longer term. So it got off to a good start, but it's just planting seeds in year 1, really. And in year 2, I've been delighted to see so much more in the way of staff ownership of that. So we started, for example, a professional learning Strands structure to the school. So we based it around what the school needed, but we had 6 different strands, and the idea was that staff members would sign up to one, and that would form a joined up course across the inset days over the year. So you could actually spend an extended amount of time on something. So rather than have one-off speakers for inset days, flash in the pan things, we would actually join it up as ongoing professional learning in a meaningful sense. And in the first year was quite difficult because I was running a lot of it, and so I was sort of dotting through different groups and getting in people from outside and so on. But it helped me identify sort of the talent in the staff in terms of people who would like to do more in the way of training their fellow teachers and things that they wanted to skill up on. So this year has been great. We've only, of our 6 strands, we've only used one person externally who's been fantastic, Jasmine Miller, who's worked with us on coaching. But every other strand has been led by staff in-house. So I think that's my big tip, is look at the talent in-house before you go outside of it. As Steve mentioned earlier on, don't just kind of bring in the expert and parachute them in. See who you've got doing really interesting things, because the advantage of that is it's people who know the context. And that really helps. And you can bring in other people to support them. I'm not saying don't do that, but try and get them to dovetail with what you're doing. Because I think that my argument is the most meaningful professional learning is very often trying to train your own peers in something. To whether that's through mentoring an NQT or leading at an inset day, something like that, is really challenging, and not a lot of teachers are comfortable with doing it. But once they've done it, they feel genuinely empowered. It's a word we bandy about in Scottish education a lot, but not often in the right context. And I think that's one way in which teachers do get empowerment, is by being able to be part of a meaningful professional learning program for their peers. So those are some of my thoughts, and I think Dollar's in great hands. It will carry on being a really good school. And that's why I was asking Dee really as well about staff reaction, because again, Dollar's a school that gets taught as one of the best in Scotland. So you could make the argument for just saying, well, let's not change anything. We're as good as we are. But actually, you've got to keep on working at this, because schools are not static places, and society is not static. You need to keep on changing with the times and changing with trends in education. So I think that's where that message was very much taken on board. And we mentioned this earlier in chatting about it, but the Dylan William thing of trying to get better as a teacher is not a deficit model. We're not saying that we're not good enough. It's just that we can always be better, because teaching perfection doesn't exist. So I repeat that quite a lot, and I think that message has landed. Everyone seems to have an intellectual curiosity about the craft of teaching now, which I'm not sure when I started out as a teacher that same thing quite existed. I don't know how you feel in that. There are 3 of you, if that's a fair comment or not.
Things have definitely changed over the years, massively so. I mean, I was thinking, you often hear that phrase, the 6 most dangerous words in education are, we've always done it this way. And,
Yeah.
I think, and this goes down to sort of a locality to where you are. As one of the pedagogues, but the teachers which came out of Edinburgh, but you and Mackintosh, and they've had such a huge impact actually on how professional development goes on. I've got a very similar example to what you've shared about how professional learning's gone on at Dollar this year. When we did our iPad 1-to-1 way back when, we had so many iPads, we were eligible for loads of Apple professional development. But actually, we were using not only just the teachers, but the children to run training sessions amongst each other. And we had all these free days, although we paid for it as part of what we were doing, but we had access to all this training on offer. But we just used the actual capacity from within, because it was so much more authentic, it was relevant, it was engaging. And I've always seen it myself, actually, as being professional development. Delivering some training to another colleague is actually really good professional development for myself. and you'll know yourselves, all three of you, delivering a presentation to just 2 colleagues is so much more nerve-wracking than delivering an assembly to 2,000 children, isn't it? Don't you find that?
It is, yeah. I can remember giving a session at a learning festival a couple of years ago in Scotland, where it was a 2-day thing, and I was on day 2, and somebody had decided that all teachers would be able to go to this in the local authority, but then they changed their minds and said, actually, teachers can go on day 1, but they'll only be there on day 2. So I've been booked for a room that about 500 odd people could sit in it. I was told, yeah, it'll be a really big audience, and I thought, oh, this will be great, it'll be fine, it'll be quite impersonal, I don't mind that. So when I walked out on stage, there were like 6 people there, but it was like Tom Sherrington and Becky Allen, and I was, oh, come on. I just felt like walking off again. I was like, no, they know a lot more about it. One of you guys come up and talk, you're smarter than I am. So absolutely, but also I think it can also be really affirming in that when you give a session like that, people want you to do well, and because they're your peers and they know you, they come along in a really supportive way and very open-minded, I think. So that, I mean, once you're 30 seconds into it, the fear goes away and it seems fine. I've only ever been heckled very rarely in an audiences that I don't know, but in audiences to your peers, it's fine.
That really resonated. It's funny that you said that, Robin, because that was my experience at Research Ed last year. It was one of the first times I'd presented, and then you walked in, Mike Lambert walked in, a bunch of other educators in the region that I really respect, and suddenly
shut the door.
Now people just go. But I remember getting a tricky question from he's called Matt, who sort of read between the lines, and you backed me up with my sort of semi-heckler. So thank you for that. I can say that publicly now. Thank you for that. Really appreciated that. Going back to that idea then that, time is of the essence, and if we could engage in research and both be inward and outwardly facing and give staff the capacity to then develop themselves pedagogically. Robin, if you could sort of go back 5-10 years to your former self, what would be the best piece of advice about leading on teaching and learning that you would share?
Yeah, I think it's just something that I didn't do really much of at all in the first 10 years that I was a teacher was really reading around pedagogy. And I mean, there wasn't so much in the way of accessible books for teachers back then. So I read The Learning Game, which was good, but that was the only book I think I read in my first 10 years. So it was through meeting Carl Hendrick, who I did the book with, that I was given so much more to read and to think about, because Carl was very well read. He was one of the few people who really was, and up to speed on everything that was going on. And he'd been working towards a PhD, so that's why he was where he was at. And I was in a department that was just based on Carl's walk from the English department up to the common room, and we had a kind of table in the foyer with a big glass plate window there. So Carl would shuffle past, and then he'd spot me sitting at the table and come in, and we'd have a chat. And it was just through that I thought, yeah, I really need to read more. And I'd got to where I got at that point as a head of department by reading lots of subject knowledge stuff. That's what I consume pretty much all the time, and I still do read a lot more non-fiction than I read fiction, even though I love fiction. So I started reading up a lot at that point, and that's around about the time that Research Ed started. So I think that's about 5 years ago now. And I remember going to the first one and coming away feeling like an absolute novice in many ways, but in a good way. I just thought I've been sitting in so many conversations, and I've heard so many really good talks about people who are doing the same job that I'm doing, and they're doing it in such a different way. And that's what I wanted to be a part of. And in some ways I was in the vanguard of that because it was a new thing, but there were lots of people who clearly were way ahead of me at that point in time. So that's it. I think, again, most of the training that I've done, certainly in the first 10 to 15 years, was all about going on a course. If you need to learn something new as a teacher, go on a course. And we now know through the Teacher Development Trust that that's a really limited way of doing things. So that's what I wish I'd done now. I try and read as much as I can. And I find it great that I can read substantial books, but I can also read blogs. I can read research journal articles as well. So vary your reading and try and read as much as you can. That's the one thing that's probably made the single biggest difference to my professional development as a teacher. I think I started that about 5 years ago, but that would have been my tip. I would say if you're starting on this now, keep going with it. It will do you good.
if you could recommend sort of your top 3 books, not that we should.
Oh God, I knew you were going to ask that.
What would you recommend?
Oh, that's so hard. I'm one of these people that's terrible. You ask me my favorite film or favorite song or favorite band or whatever, I'll give me about an hour and I'll come up with about 50 different possibilities. And I'll just boil it down. I do think one of the most important books in this trend towards academics and teachers writing books for teachers, pitched at teachers rather than academics, universities, is Make It Stick. And that's just what I know a lot of people really like that book, but it made cognitive psychology simple. And given that cognitive psychology is a history going back to the 50s and 60s, it seemed to me that should have entered mainstream education a lot earlier than it did. And I think Make It Stick was one of those great ones, as well as Daniel Willingham's book as well, Why Do Students Hate School, which he's coming out with the 2nd edition now, which is great news. Lots of people are very excited about that. So I think those 2 would have to be in there. And I think the one that prodded me the most as well is David Dowdow's book on what if everything you thought about education was wrong. Just because it did, I realized that I think after 10 years of teaching, I had a lot of fixed attitudes about things that I wasn't willing to break, and thought, I know this is what my experience has taught me, this works, this is it. And having read that book, it just made me go back and question everything again in a very reflective way. So it encouraged, I think, a good thought process as much as anything else. So that would be in the mix as well. I really liked his blogs, and one of the great things that at EdFest, and Carl talks about this a lot as well, was when he debated Dylan William. And at the time, he was this kind of like bullshit blogger that was new on the scene, and Dylan was obviously way up there on the pedestal. And he just took him on in a room, and I was at the back of that room. And at that point, Carl and I hadn't met, but it was standing space only. I mean, it was absolutely packed to the rafters, and it was brilliant. It was just kind of here's somebody who really knows the research, a world-respected figure up against an English teacher who's just loads of questions and has done lots of interesting reading. And again, it was one of those moments that makes you think, yeah, I need to go away and read some more. So if you ask me again in 20 minutes, I'll give you 3 different books, but that's what I'm sticking to at this moment in time.
I'll jump in with a sort of a more ed-techy type one. This is to Dee first, but I'd like your thoughts on it as well, Robin, please. The technology has got a real propensity to be really gimmicky and, bells and whistles and all the rest of it. But, clearly through the conversation we're talking about tonight, it's research informed for efficacy, it's about what works and things. Well, I'm really keen to find out from both of you is what sort of ed-tech tool or tip helps you most with the work that you do? So, Dee first.
Right, so EdTech tip, what, to enhance teaching and learning?
Yeah, or just helping you do the job you do from day to day. It could be an app that you use regularly and which helps you do what you need to do, or anything at all, sort of using technology. Yeah.
At the minute, the hero is Microsoft Teams for me. I mean, it has revolutionized the way that we work. It's been able to facilitate like live lessons for us, but also we didn't have or land on a VLE, and all of a sudden now, all of our resources can be mapped to SharePoint. We've got collaborative spaces. We've got areas where we can quickly communicate, share PD. We've got a whole online channel just dedicated to PD, where staff have shared Microsoft streams or videos. So the hero, and I'm not paid for this, is definitely for me, Microsoft Teams has been absolutely revolutionary for us. Yeah, I can't even speak now. It's that time. It's my bed. It's 9 o'clock, guys.
It's a really fantastic tool, and it's been great seeing it being used in so many schools as well. I know Ollie's been using it at his school, and he's a big fan of it too. And it's that great technology that just facilitates what you want to do. It facilitates teaching and learning. It gives you that real opportunity to carry on as best as you can under the circumstances with what you might normally want to try and do within your school, even though you can't actually be all together. I think it's really, really powerful. So it's a great share, Dee. Thank you very much for that. So same question to you, Robin.
Yeah, I think like Dee, I'm using Teams at the moment. Really like it. Find it very straightforward, and I enjoy doing that. I think I don't know if this counts as quite a teaching learning tip or not, but I think it is very helpful to have a knowledge of the different main platforms going on, just to keep yourself aware of how the market is developing. So I've always had a thing that for the last 2 schools I've been at, we've done Microsoft. So I made a point of using Google for my own things. So I basically use Google for my Gmail, Drive, and so on, my own files, but my schoolwork I keep on Microsoft, just so I know what's going on. And I'm about to move to a school that's on Google, so that will be an easy transition simply because I'm used to all the functionality of it. And I think that's is to try and also think as well about what will be good for teachers in terms of saving them time. I think EdTech really should save teachers time. And if it's not doing that, then you'd have to question whether or not you should persevere with it. You might need to invest some time at the beginning in terms of training, but in the long term, you hopefully get that back. And that's where I do like Microsoft, because I find that that's streamlined a lot of what I've done and made life a little bit easier. But also, I think we need to make sure that pupils are benefiting. So EdTech also needs to do that too. So those are my two kind of golden rules: save teachers time and make sure pupils benefit. But I think we also need to think about what are pupils going to need in the next step of their journey when they've left school. So I think we're using a lot of platforms that are maybe not going to appear again for them after they leave school. So that's where knowing what's really going on and what happens next, and making sure pupils are skilled up for life beyond that is a good thing. So look at what are universities using. On day one of university, are our pupils going to be using Teams or not? If they are, then great, they're fine. But if you're using a platform that's not that, then are you making sure that they're ready and equipped to go on?
I was just going to pitch in. I think it's also really important to match it to the pedagogy that sort of embodies your teaching and learning policy, because quite often there's so much new stuff out there. It's like you can't see between the trees. So, for us, things that encourage oracy, things that encourage the science of learning, collaboration, communication, like Padlet or Mentimeter, those sorts of things, they've been really simple, but just really nice ways of giving feedback, formative feedback, or collating and collaborating. So I think if you've got a good teaching and learning strategy, you can pin technology to that to see if it matches what your values and ethos are.
Mm-hmm.
That goes directly to the Fulham thing as well, about having a pedagogy first approach to your use of technology. It's a really good reckoner to help sort of keep you honest when it comes to the choices you make. Sorry, Robin, you were saying something as well.
No, not at all. Just to back that up, I think we talk a lot about digital strategy, but I think we should talk more about digital philosophy first, and think about values, because it's not often that I've found it really refreshing hearing you talk about this so much tonight, but to talk about values in EdTech in the same breath. You don't hear that very much. We kind of use technology because we never question why we should be using it. But actually, if you think about your digital philosophy first, it makes it easier to think of a strategy that will work for your context. So in other words, what is the role of technology in education? What should we be using it for? Why should we be using it? If that rationale is in place and we can all agree that, it's much easier to take the next steps. But we too often skip that step, I think.
I'm just waiting. I thought you were going to say something then, Ollie. Sorry.
No, sorry.
Yeah, I was thinking about something, but my phone distracted me then. It's really refreshing to do that, because Mark, I think I've learned this from you, that technology is just there to support and enhance teaching and learning, and it shouldn't necessarily be the thing at the forefront. It's the supportive tool that aids both teachers, drives efficiency and effectiveness. So it's really refreshing to hear, all of our guests tonight talk about it like that, and actually discuss pedagogy first. Going full circle again, coming back to Fulham. And that's how it should be. It shouldn't be right, what tech am I going to use in this lesson? It should be right, what pedagogical strategy I'm going to use, and what can support me on that journey with the students. That's what was sort of occurred to my mind at the time. I'm conscious of time though, Mark, as well. We're only about...
Yeah, absolutely. We're a few minutes out before we sort of wrap up. I guess that leaves me just to say then, thank you very much to Robin for coming and joining us here on the show this evening, and to you, Dee. Robin, before we go, could you, we can see your Twitter handle there on the screen, but if people want to find out more about you, this is an opportunity for you to sort of share about your blog, talk a bit about PL Gathering if you want to. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, please.
You did a great job of that. Yeah, well done.
Makes a nice change, I can tell you. But talk about where people can find out about that and get involved, and your book, and any sort of new writing you're doing and what you're working towards on that. So over to you if you want to sort of share a little bit about yourself for a moment, please, so people can find out more about you.
Yeah, a few bits and pieces. So on my Twitter account, there's a link to my website, and so that's got different bits and pieces about the book, blogs that I write. I'm not a frequent blogger. I'll maybe knock out one about every 3 months or something. But I've written a couple recently, and one on teaching COVID, which seems to have been circulated quite widely, but it was more just synthesizing a lot of different sources. So by all means, have a look through that. You can also have a look for, well, Research Ed, and those of you who are familiar with it will know a lot about it. Organise Research Ed Scotland with Tom Bennett and others. So I think that's a good place to have a look as well. I've got an Amazon author page. I've done some textbooks and things for Cambridge University Press, which is quite good fun. What else? LinkedIn page, I'm on that too. I'm about to move to Robert Gordon's College in Aberdeen. So a fantastic school, and I did an inset day for them actually a couple of years ago, and I was given a tour at the end of the day by the outgoing head, Simon Mills, who's a fantastic guy who's moving to Kazakhstan actually, and was so impressed with what I saw, and just all the things we've been talking about tonight, the attitude to professional learning, the agency that goes with that, the willingness to innovate in an intelligent way around technology. Loved all of it. So when the job came up last year, I was so excited about it and delighted to be appointed. So if people want to keep an eye on Robert Gordon's in the future, please do. It's a school with, again, partnerships. Dee talked a lot about that tonight. Gordon partnered very well with the two universities in Aberdeen, but they're also part of something called GALE, which is a global alliance of schools in places like India, New Zealand, Peru, America, that are into innovative education. They also have a partnership with MIT. Two visiting students will come in and teach the kids at Gordon's every year from MIT, which is an amazing experience for them. And also the British International School of Houston. So it's a school that's embedded right in the heart of Aberdeen, but with a global network. So exciting times. So if you're interested, have a look at what we're doing. There'll be a lot of stuff coming out of that in the future.
Brilliant stuff, and congratulations on the job again, Robin. Well done.
Thank you.
Dee, can you share a bit about where people can find out more about you and your LinkedIn and any sort of sharings that you do? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as present as Robin on social media, but if you want to sort of follow what we're doing, the website, Dubai College website, is a great place. We've got a Twitter handle dedicated to teaching and learning. At Dubai College, it's called Decon Learning. It's temporarily suspended, but it should be back online soon. Again, like Robin, Research Ed, we're hoping to have that back next April. So watch out for that. That should be hopefully another good lineup. We had Mary Myatt, Paul Kirshner lined up for that, so that should be good. And then also the UAE Research Schools Network. It's a network of 4 schools that are doing some really exciting things with the Chartered College. Some universities, some partnerships with local universities, global universities. So follow UAE Research Schools Network as well, because they've also got some really good PD as well as Decon Learning.
Awesome stuff. Thank you ever so much, Dee. Thank you. And thank you again, Robin, too. Ollie, would you like to just wrap up and say goodbye and talk about next week's episode?
Just a massive thank you from both of us to Robin and Dee. Next week's episode is looking at future schools after COVID, which is a situation that many of us can resonate with. So what that might look like. We've got 2 guests coming on the show. We've got Liz Free, who is a well-known educator involved in Women Ed, as well as moving from the British School of Netherlands to a school in Switzerland that's very well renowned, but the name escapes me now that I'm trying to think of it. And we've also got an educator from the Middle East, Natasha Hilton, who is in charge of, she's assistant head primary at the British School of Muscat. Again, involved with Women Ed quite heavily, and the Chartered College of Teaching and Teacher Professional Development. So really looking forward to hearing what they've both got to share and what they're doing in preparation for September.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much again, Ollie, and thank you both, Robin and Dee. Those links you shared around UAE Research Network and what have you, I'll reply to the main tweet and we'll put it into the show notes here on YouTube as well. Final thank you goes to you for tuning in and spending some time with us this evening here on Learn Live UAE. We'll be back again this time next week. But in the meantime, have a great week, be safe, and look after yourselves. Thank you ever so much. Bye.
Bye.